Hi, I'm Kevin Tan. I teach law at the National University, Faculty of Law. The original purpose of the presidency stems from two facts. Number one fact was that in 1981, the People's Action Party had lost its total hegemony over Parliament. From 1968 to 1981, they controlled every single seat. But in 1981, J.B. Jeyaretnam won the by-election in Anson constituency. And that set in motion a number of things. The then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was extremely concerned about not the loss of Anson, but the voter shift. During the general election, the PAP had scored a very high percentage. And what they saw with one by-election was a shift of something like 16% away from the ruling party. But in that sense, he thought about it in a bigger, broader perspective. He said, well, we could lose power, but we will come back, right? That's the nature of parliamentary elections. You lose power, you come back. But you don't want to come back to see that in the meantime, whoever got elected has spent everything, has actually, basically raided the larder. And then you come back and you've got, very, very little to work with, very, very little to build on. So the idea was that you would have somebody to ensure that all the reserves that have been built up over the years doesn't get spent overnight. At the time when this problem was raised, there were a number of suggestions. One of them was that why don't we create an upper house where you have a body of persons, elected persons, one of whose role is to have a checking power on the use of state assets and of course integrity of civil service and things like that. But that was wholly rejected by the government. I think the government was concerned about creating alternative centers of power, and they didn't want to create an upper house that had more power or some kind of blocking power over a lower house. So it was decided that all these powers would repose in one person and that they would transfer or transform what was hitherto a nominated office into an elected one, a popularly elected one.
So do you think Singapore needs a president at all?
Well, I think we do need a president because within the system of government that we've inherited and we've sort of, run, I think fairly successfully over the years, which is the Westminster system of government. You have a head of state who is not the head of government. The head of government is the one who does all the work, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and so on. The head of state is titular, it's largely ceremonial, but the head of state stands above the fray of popular politics. And to me, that's good because you want a head of state who is a unifier and not a divider. The president's powers are basically as set out in the Constitution, but no legal document can possibly give you the entire gamut of what a head of state is required to do. The president represents the state and the totality of the Singapore people, right? And so in that sense, the president has a lot of these, unenumerated roles. And that's where I suppose you can have some imagination, right? They go for a lot of opening ceremonies, they make a lot of speeches. They support charities, they are patrons of this or that, and so on. Now, in this role, I think there is a measure of flexibility and therefore opportunities for presidents to distinguish themselves from other people. So a president may, for example, like President Halimah Yacob was very, very much concerned. She remains very much concerned with women's issues. So I think she makes it a point to, try as much as possible to accept these invitations, to go there and to give, sort of encouragement and support. In making these speeches, you have opportunities to say things, somehow to shift public opinion, but always, right, sort of on the balance, trying to make sure that you don't, right, step into the political fray. Once you start taking sides, then you would appear to be either supporting political party A or political party B. Don't forget that when you run for president, you have to disavow all your sort of political connections, right? So Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, for example, had to resign from the PAP.
So in that sense, do you think the law can or should be used to create a bigger distinction between, the president's powers, what they should and can?
I think you shouldn't have too many rules. All right? Otherwise, then you just have an automaton as the president. No. I think the president has to do certain things. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? I hope such a situation, a scenario never befalls Singapore. But let's say you have a really fractious parliament. Let's say you have a coalition government and everybody's bickering and the situation is getting worse by the day. I don't think it makes sense to say there's a rule that says president shouldn't say anything. At that point, if you are the president, you should tell everybody, excuse me, we've got a national crisis on our hands, right? And the president can be, in that sense, a lot more activist, but it's situational.
So do you think the office of president as it is now is good enough?
No, I think there's a major problem in the presidency as it stands now. When the constitution was amended in 2017 to raise the requirements for the private sector candidate from being a CEO or CFO of a company of 100 billion in capitalization to being the CEO of a company with $500 million in share equity, that represented a major jump, right? In my view, I'm not sure that you are addressing the proxies. You are merely reducing the pool. You don't want so many people to compete, so let's reduce the pool, right? And what is worse with this amendment is that the Presidential Elections Committee can recommend to Parliament to increase it at any time. So you have to go back to the beginning and say, what is it that I'm looking for? What qualities is it that I'm looking for in a presidential candidate that might be found if this person has these experiences? So yes, it's one thing to say I categorize it as public and private, but at the end of the day, you're looking for the same qualities, aren't you?
How would you edit or adapt the criteria to make it more in line with the qualities that we're actually looking for?
How would I amend it? Well, my original position is forget about electing a president, because all you do is just making the office more and more complex. It doesn't make any sense. Who's the most powerful politician in Singapore? Prime Minister. What are the requirements for a Prime Minister? Age 21, qualify to be able to sit in Parliament. That's all. And he has got way bigger responsibilities and duties than the president. So why are we making this office so difficult and so complex to do, frankly, not that much? It's really not easy to have shareholder equity 500 million. If you know anything about running companies, it means keeping the value of the company at 500 million throughout in terms of valuation. Okay, if you run a public company, a bit easier because you've got shareholder and there's shareholder value. If you run a private company, it essentially means that you don't take your dividends, or just like hold on to the thing so they keep the value of the company for years. Who in their right frame of mind would do that?
So, in your point of view, we should just go back to having an appointed president?
Yes, absolutely. I don't need an elected president with a mandate to check the government anymore. We appoint a person whom we think would be a major unifying figure for Singapore, is able, by dint of this person's, experience and standing and so on, and abilities and eminence. The role of checking the government, ensuring that your budgets don't get busted, that don't get spent wantonly, that should be and placed in a separate body altogether. Then you don't have any complications. Because, even with election, how much of a majority do you require? In that election, Tony Tan won slightly over 35% of the vote. That means there's almost 65% of people who didn't vote for you, And yet you say, I have the mandate? I think that's a stretch.
What do you think the ideal president or a good president, what qualities should they possess?
I think a good presidential candidate is somebody who cares deeply about Singapore and cares deeply about people. I think you don't want a president who doesn't want to talk to people, and so on, right? I think they must love Singapore because then they can go out there and represent Singapore in the best possible light. Beyond that, I think people can only say, well, is this person fairly eminent? Some people might say it's much more important that this person has held official office. Some of us think, no, it doesn't need to be a person who has held official office, so long as they are respected by others. That's good enough. So we internally among us would obviously have different criteria and priorities. The elected presidency only came into effect in 1991. But in the first almost 30 years of our nationhood, we had excellent presidents. Yusof Ishak, right? Benjamin Sheares. Where did they come from? Yusof Ishak was a retired newspaper journalist, right? He ran Utusan Melayu, and Lee Kuan Yew found him retired growing orchids, and he said, no, you come and be the president. Excellent first president. Couldn't have asked for better. Would he qualify today? No way. Utusan Melayu, small newspaper. Benjamin Sheares, what was he? He was a professor of obstetrics and gynecology. Would he qualify today? No, he wouldn't qualify. And yet, we had very good presidents. To me, most important, you have to be independent. The president must, in the appropriate situation, have the mandate and the gumption to actually tell the government of the day no.
Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to click on the subscribe button and the notification bell.